The notification came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, lighting up the secret phone I kept hidden in my workshop toolbox. Bank alert, account accessed, $847 transferred to Comcast for service disconnection. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling, not from the cold October air seeping through the garage door, but from the realization that my own daughter had just cut my lifelines to the outside world. Sarah thought she was so damn clever. 42 years old, MBA from Northwestern, and she'd convinced herself that isolating her old man was some kind of intervention. "For your own good, Dad," she'd said 3 weeks ago when she moved back into the house after her divorce. "You spend too much time online, getting worked up about politics and conspiracy theories. You need to focus on reality." Reality? As if the woman who'd blown through a 6-figure salary and a marriage in 2 years had any right to lecture me about reality. I clicked off the phone and slipped it back under the false bottom of my tool drawer, a hiding spot I'd perfected during 32 years of marriage when Helen would go through my things looking for evidence of affairs that never happened. Old habits die hard, even 3 years after the cancer took her. The house felt different when I walked back inside. Colder somehow, even though Sarah had cranked the thermostat up to 78 like she was still living in her Lincoln Park condo. The silence was what got to me most. No gentle hum of the router, no soft ping of email notifications. Just the ticking of the grandfather clock Helen's mother had given us for our 10th anniversary, marking time in a house that now felt more like a prison. "Dad, you okay out there?" Sarah's voice drifted down from upstairs, falsely concerned. She'd been monitoring my movements ever since she'd taken over the bills, claiming it was because she was worried about my mental state. What she really meant was that she was worried about the inheritance slipping away from her manicured fingers. "Just checking the furnace," I called back, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "Go back to sleep." But I knew she wouldn't. Sarah never slept well in this house. Too many memories of the fights she'd had with her mother, too many reminders of the disappointment she'd become. She'd lie up there staring at the ceiling, probably planning her next move in whatever game she thought she was playing. I made my way to the kitchen and poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon from the bottle I kept hidden behind the cleaning supplies. Sarah thought she'd found all my stashes, but she'd never been as thorough as she believed. The liquor burned going down, but it was a clean burn, not like the acid that had been eating away at my stomach since she'd moved back in. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the dinner she'd made earlier, some quinoa and kale monstrosity that tasted like cardboard and virtue signaling. "You need to eat healthier, Dad," she lectured while pushing the slop around her own plate. "Heart disease runs in the family." As if I didn't know that my father had dropped dead at 68 while mowing the lawn on a Sunday afternoon in July, his heart exploding like an overfilled balloon. I thought about calling my son Michael on the secret phone, but it was too early even for his insomniac schedule. Besides, what would I tell him? That his sister had finally shown her true colors? Michael already knew what Sarah was capable of. He'd cut contact with her 2 years ago after she'd tried to borrow $50,000 to invest in cryptocurrency. Smart kid, even if he'd inherited his mother's stubborn streak along with her green eyes. The bourbon was working its magic, loosening the knot in my chest that had been growing tighter every day since Sarah's return. I allowed myself to remember what this house used to feel like when Helen was alive, when the kids were young and the future stretched out before us like an open highway. Back then, the silence was comfortable, filled with the kind of contentment that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Now, the silence felt like suffocation. I finished my drink and considered pouring another, but the secret phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. "Don, this is Janet from next door. Saw the Comcast truck today. Everything okay?" Janet Morrison had been our neighbor for 15 years, ever since she and her husband bought the Colonial next door. She was one of those women who noticed everything, but said nothing unless asked directly. The kind of neighbor Helen had loved, and I'd always found slightly irritating, with her perfectly maintained garden and her habit of bringing over casseroles whenever someone in the neighborhood got sick. I typed back, "All fine. Sarah's handling the utilities now." The response came immediately. "Concerned about you. Haven't seen you much lately. Coffee tomorrow?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. When was the last time I'd had a real conversation with someone other than Sarah? When was the last time I'd left the house for something other than groceries or doctor appointments? The answer made my chest tighten again. "Sure, 10 a.m. Perfect. My kitchen. Need to show you something." I turned off the phone and headed upstairs, moving carefully on the steps that had developed a squeak in the fourth stair from the top. Sarah's bedroom door was closed, but I could see the blue glow of her laptop screen underneath. Probably scrolling through social media, curating her image as the devoted daughter caring for her aging father. She'd always been good at creating narratives that painted her in the best possible light. My own bedroom felt cavernous without Helen's presence. Even after 3 years, I still slept on my side of the king-sized bed, as if she might roll over in the middle of the night and ask me to rub her back like she used to when the chemo made her bones ache. The empty space beside me was a constant reminder of everything I'd lost and everything I had left to lose. I lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around me, and thought about the woman who'd shared my life for 3 decades. Helen would have seen through Sarah's manipulation immediately. She'd always been able to read our daughter like a book, understanding the complex mix of ambition and insecurity that drove her to make increasingly desperate choices. "She's scared, Dawn," Helen had said during one of Sarah's earlier financial crises. "Scared she'll never measure up to what she thinks we expect from her." But Helen wasn't here to offer her wisdom or her forgiveness anymore. It was just me and Sarah, circling each other like wounded animals in a house that had once been filled with laughter and love. The secret phone remained silent for the rest of the night, but I kept it within arm's reach, a lifeline to a world that Sarah thought she could cut me off from. She'd always underestimated me, even as a child. While Michael had been obvious in his rebellions and easy to read, Sarah had been subtle, manipulative, the kind of kid who could convince you that black was white and make you thank her for the Enlightenment. I must have dozed off somewhere around 5, but the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the bedroom windows and the smell of coffee was drifting up from the kitchen. Sarah was an early riser, a habit she developed during her corporate days when 6 a.m. conference calls with overseas clients were routine. I could hear her moving around downstairs, the clink of dishes and the soft murmur of her voice as she talked on the phone. Probably to her lawyer, I thought grimly. Sarah had been in contact with an elder care attorney ever since she'd moved back in, ostensibly to help me plan for the future. But I'd caught enough fragments of her conversations to know she was really planning for her future, specifically how to gain control of my assets before I was too senile to stop her. I checked the secret phone. Another text from Janet. "Looking forward to coffee. Bring your appetite." I smiled despite myself. Janet Morrison might be nosy, but she made the best apple turnovers in the neighborhood. Helen had always been secretly jealous of Janet's baking skills, though she'd never admit it out loud. I showered and dressed carefully, choosing clothes that would irritate Sarah. My old Carhartt jacket and the work boots I'd worn for 20 years at the plant before retiring. She preferred when I dressed like the suburban retiree she wanted me to be. Polo shirts and khakis, the uniform of defeated masculinity. But today, I wanted to feel like myself again, like the man who'd built this house with his own hands and raised 2 children and buried the woman he loved. Sarah was waiting for me in the kitchen, her laptop open on the counter next to her perfectly prepared breakfast of Greek yogurt and fresh berries. She looked up when I entered, and I caught a flash of something in her eyes, Guilt, maybe? Or fear? "Morning, Dad. Sleep okay?" "Like a baby," I lied, pouring myself coffee from the pot she'd made. It was weak, the way she preferred it, not the thick black brew Helen and I had shared every morning for 30 years. "I thought we could spend the day together," she said, closing the laptop with a decisive snap. "Maybe go to the Arboretum. You always loved it there." The Arboretum, where Helen and I had taken our first real date, walking the trails and talking about everything and nothing while the leaves turned gold around us. Where I'd proposed on a bench overlooking the pond, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the ring out of the box. Where I'd scattered Helen's ashes 2 years ago, on a morning when the mist rose from the water like her spirit returning to the place where our love had begun. "Can't today," I said, watching her face carefully. "Having coffee with Janet Morrison." Sarah's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mrs. Morrison? When did you arrange that?" "Yesterday." The lie came easily, smoothly. "Ran into her at the mailbox." But Sarah was sharper than I sometimes gave her credit for. "Dad, you didn't get any mail yesterday. I picked it up myself." I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. "Must have been the day before then. Hard to keep track when every day feels the same." She studied my face for a long moment, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. Sarah had always been paranoid about losing control, even as a child. If she sensed that I had access to communication she couldn't monitor, she'd find a way to shut it down. "I don't think it's a good idea," she said finally. "Mrs. Morrison is nice enough, but she's a gossip, and you know how you get around people, worked up, agitated. The doctor said you need to avoid stress." The doctor? Dr. Peterson, who'd been my physician for 12 years and had never once suggested I avoid social interaction. The same Dr. Peterson whose notes Sarah had somehow gained access to, using her power of attorney to discuss my mental health concerns behind my back. "I'm having coffee with a neighbor, not running a marathon," I said. "I think I can handle it." Sarah's smile was tight, controlled. "Of course you can. I just worry about you, that's all. Ever since Mom died, you've been different, more isolated, more suspicious of people's motives." There it was, the subtle gaslighting that had become her specialty. Question my perception of reality, make me doubt my own judgment, paint my natural reactions to her manipulation as signs of mental decline. "I'm going," I said firmly. End of discussion. She nodded, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. Sarah never gave up easily, and she was already planning her next move. Probably something involving Dr. Peterson and concerns about my safety and decision-making capacity. I finished my coffee and headed for the door, pulling on my jacket with deliberate slowness. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. October in Illinois was Helen's favorite time of year, when the maples turned scarlet and the air held the promise of winter without its bite. Janet Morrison's house was a mirror image of mine, but where my property showed signs of neglect, overgrown bushes, peeling paint on the shutters, hers was maintained with military precision. Every blade of grass was perfectly trimmed, every flower bed meticulously weeded. Her late husband had been a Marine, and some habits die hard. She answered the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching from the window. Janet was 73 but looked 10 years younger, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and bright blue eyes that missed nothing. "Don, come in, come in. Coffee's fresh and the turnovers just came out of the oven." Her kitchen was warm and inviting, all yellows and whites with sunlight streaming through lace curtains. It felt like stepping into my grandmother's house, all comfort and safety and the kind of maternal warmth I hadn't experienced since Helen's death. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to a chair at her kitchen table. "You look like you haven't been eating enough." It was true. Food had lost most of its appeal since Sarah moved in, turning every meal into a lecture about nutrition and heart-healthy choices. I'd probably lost 15 pounds in the past month, not from any conscious effort, but from a simple lack of interest in the tasteless meals she prepared. Janet set a plate in front of me with 2 turnovers still warm from the oven, the crust flaky and golden brown. The first bite transported me back 30 years to church potlucks and neighborhood barbecues, to a time when food was about pleasure and community rather than obligation and control. "Now then," Janet said, settling into the chair across from me with her own coffee. "What's really going on over there?" I almost choked on the turnover. "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb with me. I've been watching that girl of yours since she moved back in, and something's not right. The way she watches you, monitors your every move. The way she answers the door now when people come calling, like she's screening your visitors." I set down my fork, suddenly aware of how hungry I'd been for this. Not just the food, but the human connection, the acknowledgement that someone else saw what was happening to me. "It's complicated," I said carefully. "Complicated how?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like she's isolating you." Harold went through something similar with his son before he passed. Boy moved in under the guise of helping, then gradually took control of everything. Bank accounts, social contacts, even his medication. Harold Brennan had lived 3 houses down, a retired electrician who'd worked alongside me at the plant for 15 years. I'd lost touch with him during Helen's illness, too consumed with doctor visits and treatment schedules to maintain friendships. He died 2 years ago, and I'd learned about it from his obituary in the paper. "What happened to Harold?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Found him on his bathroom floor 6 months after his son moved in. Heart attack, they said, but he'd been as healthy as a horse before that boy started controlling every aspect of his life." Janet's voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes were hard. "Stress kills, Dawn, especially when it comes from the people who are supposed to love you." I thought about the knot in my chest that had been growing tighter every day, about the way my hands shook now when I was angry, about the headaches that had become a constant presence since Sarah's return. "She canceled my internet and phone service," I said quietly, "claims it's for my own good." Janet nodded as if she'd expected this. "How are you communicating with the outside world?" I hesitated for a moment, then decided to trust her. Janet Morrison had been a good neighbor for 15 years, had brought soup when Helen was sick, and snowblown my driveway without being asked. If I couldn't trust her, I couldn't trust anyone. "I have a cell phone she doesn't know about," I said. "Bought it last year when Helen was in the hospital. Needed a way to stay in touch with the doctors when I wasn't there." "Smart man." Janet reached into a drawer and pulled out a manila folder. "I've been documenting things. Photos of the Comcast truck, notes about when you leave the house and when she follows you. Times when I've seen her going through your mail before you get home from your walks." She opened the folder and spread the contents across the table. There were photographs, detailed notes, even printouts of what looked like research on elder abuse and financial exploitation. "Why?" I asked. "Because I went through this with my own father 20 years ago. My brother convinced Dad to sign over power of attorney, then systematically drained his accounts while keeping him isolated from family and friends. By the time I figured out what was happening, Dad was in a nursing home and broke, and my brother had disappeared with $300,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $300,000 was roughly what I had left in retirement savings, not counting the house and Helen's life insurance policy. What should I do? The question came out sounding pathetic, like a child asking for help tying his shoes. First, you need to understand what you're dealing with. This isn't about you getting old or needing care. This is about money and control. Your daughter sees you as an obstacle to her inheritance, and she's systematically removing your ability to resist her. Janet pulled out another sheet of paper, this one covered with her neat handwriting. "I've been researching elder financial abuse. It's more common than you'd think, and adult children are the most frequent perpetrators. They use emotional manipulation, isolation, and legal maneuvers to gain control of their parents' assets." "But Sarah's my daughter," I said weakly. "She wouldn't?" "Wouldn't what? Steal from you? Lie to you? Manipulate you into signing away your independence? Janet's voice was gentle but firm. "Don, honey, blood doesn't make someone trustworthy, and desperation makes people do terrible things." I thought about Sarah's divorce, her lost job, the mounting debt she'd mentioned in passing but never discussed in detail. How desperate was she? Desperate enough to sacrifice her relationship with her father for financial security? "What's my next step?" I asked. "Document everything. Keep that phone charged and hidden. Start recording your conversations with her. Illinois is a one-party consent state, so it's legal as long as you're part of the conversation. And most importantly, don't let her know that you're onto her scheme." Janet handed me a small device that looked like a pen. "Digital recorder. Voice-activated. Holds up to 30 hours of audio. Keep it in your shirt pocket." I turned the device over in my hands, marveling at how light it was. Technology had come so far since my days at the plant, when recording a conversation required bulky equipment and miles of tape. "There's something else," Janet said. "I think she's been opening your mail. I've seen her at the mailbox several times when the carrier comes, and yesterday I watched her steam open an envelope in her car before bringing it inside." Mail tampering was a federal crime, but it was also something that would be nearly impossible to prove without video evidence. Still, the thought that Sarah was intercepting my correspondence sent a chill down my spine. What else was she controlling that I didn't know about? "I need to get back," I said, standing up from the table. "She'll get suspicious if I'm gone too long." "Don." Janet caught my arm as I headed for the door. "Be careful. People who are desperate enough to steal from their own parents are desperate enough to do other things. If she feels cornered, if she thinks you're going to expose her—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I thought about Harold Brennan, found dead on his bathroom floor. Heart attack brought on by stress, the doctor had said. But who could say what kind of stress, or where it had come from? I walked back to my house slowly, taking time to notice details I'd been missing. The way the curtains in the front window moved when I approached, as if someone had been watching for my return. The small pile of mail on the kitchen counter that hadn't been there when I left, suggesting Sarah had been to the mailbox while I was gone. The subtle rearrangement of items in my workshop, evidence that she'd been searching for something while I was out. "How was coffee?" Sarah asked when I came inside. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, but I could tell she'd just closed whatever she'd been working on. "Nice. Janet makes good turnovers." "I'm sure she does." Sarah's smile was brittle. "What did you two talk about?" "This and that. She's thinking about selling the house, moving closer to her daughter in Florida." It was a lie, but a plausible one. Janet had mentioned her daughter during our conversation, though in the context of her own experience with elder abuse rather than any plans to relocate. Sarah turned back to her laptop, but I could feel her attention focused on me like a laser. "Dad, I've been thinking about what we discussed earlier, about you seeing Dr. Peterson for a checkup. I saw him 3 weeks ago. Clean bill of health." "I know, but I'm concerned about your mental state. The isolation, the paranoia about my motives. It might be worth discussing with a specialist." A specialist? A psychiatrist who could declare me mentally incompetent, giving Sarah legal grounds to take complete control of my affairs. The net was tightening, and I was running out of time to escape it. "I'll think about it," I said, keeping my voice neutral. That evening, after Sarah had gone to bed, I sat in my workshop with the secret phone and the digital recorder Janet had given me. The weight of the situation was settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. My own daughter was systematically destroying my independence, and I was complicit in my own isolation. I thought about calling Michael, but what would I tell him? That his sister was trying to steal his inheritance? That his father was too weak and foolish to protect him from a woman half his size? Michael had his own life, his own problems. He didn't need to be dragged into this mess. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed. Not to any particular god or religious tradition, but to Helen, to the memory of the woman who'd been my partner and my strength for 30 years. I asked her what she would do, how she would handle the situation. The answer came to me with startling clarity. Helen would fight. She'd fight dirty if necessary, using every tool at her disposal to protect what we'd built together. She wouldn't let Sarah destroy our legacy or manipulate our family out of fear or false guilt. I turned on the digital recorder and began to speak, documenting everything I could remember about the past 3 weeks. Sarah's arrival, her gradual takeover of my household, her manipulation of my medical care and finances. I spoke for nearly an hour, creating a record that might someday save my life, or at least preserve my dignity. When I was finished, I hid the recorder in the same toolbox as my phone and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new manipulations, new attempts to erode my independence. But for the first time since Sarah had moved back into my house, I felt like I had a plan. The game was far from over, and I was finally ready to play. The next morning brought the first real test of my newfound resolve. I was drinking my coffee and reading a newspaper I'd bought during my morning walk when Sarah emerged from upstairs carrying a manila folder thick with documents. "Dad, I need you to sign some papers," she announced, setting the folder on the kitchen table with authority. "I've been working with the attorney to streamline your finances, make things easier for both of us." The recording device was in my shirt pocket, already activated by the sound of our voices. I forced myself to remain calm, even though my pulse had accelerated to match the urgency of the situation. "What kind of papers?" I asked, not reaching for the folder. "Just some reorganization, consolidating your accounts, updating your beneficiaries, that sort of thing." Sarah's voice was carefully casual, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Nothing major, just housekeeping, really." I opened the folder and began reading, my blood growing colder with each page. These weren't housekeeping documents. They were a complete transfer of financial control, giving Sarah power of attorney over all my assets, authority to make medical decisions on my behalf, and, most damning of all, the legal right to place me in a care facility if she deemed it necessary. "This says you can put me in a nursing home," I said, pointing to the relevant clause. "Only if it becomes medically necessary," Sarah replied quickly. "It's just a precaution, Dad, something we hope we'll never need to use." "And this part about the house?" "That's just to make sure the property transfer goes smoothly when the time comes. You know how complicated these things can be without proper documentation." "When the time comes?" As if my death were an inevitability she was actively planning for, rather than a distant possibility she hoped to avoid. "I need time to review these," I said, closing the folder. Sarah's mask slipped slightly. "Dad, the attorney is expecting these back today. I've already paid his retainer, and he's cleared his schedule to file them this afternoon." "Then he can wait another day, or week. They're my assets, Sarah, not yours." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Sarah's carefully constructed facade of loving concern cracked, revealing something harder and more calculating underneath. "Don't be difficult about this," she said. "We both know you're not equipped to handle these decisions anymore. The confusion, the forgetfulness, the way you've been acting since Mom died. This is what responsible adult children do." There it was again. The gaslighting, the suggestion that my resistance to her control was evidence of mental decline rather than reasonable self-preservation. I wondered how many times she'd used this script, how many elderly parents had been worn down by this combination of false concern and implied threats. "I'm not signing anything today," I said firmly. Sarah stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her recalculating, adjusting her strategy in real time. When she spoke again, her voice carried a subtle threat. "Dad, I think it's time we scheduled that appointment with Dr. Peterson, and maybe got a second opinion from a neurologist. These episodes of paranoia and hostility are getting worse." Episodes. As if my refusal to surrender my independence was a symptom of disease rather than a rational response to her manipulation. There won't be any appointments until I decide there need to be appointments, I said. Actually, as your daughter and closest family member, I have the right to advocate for your medical care, especially when you're clearly not capable of making sound decisions. The implicit threat was clear. If I didn't cooperate with her financial schemes, she'd use the medical system to declare me incompetent. It was a brilliant strategy, really. Use my own doctor against me, my own family relationships as weapons in her war for control. I stood up from the table, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. I'm going for a walk. Dad, we need to finish this conversation. No, we don't. The conversation is finished until I say it isn't. I left her sitting at the kitchen table with her unsigned documents, knowing that my defiance had escalated the conflict to a new level. Sarah would regroup, probably call her attorney or Dr. Peterson or both. The next move would be more aggressive, more sophisticated. But for now, I had bought myself time. I walked the neighborhood for an hour, noting things I'd missed during my daily routines. The way Mrs. Chen watched me from her front window, concern evident in her expression. The small American flag that the Johnsons had taken down from their porch, probably at Sarah's suggestion during one of her neighborhood charm offensives. The way my own house looked from the street, windows that were always curtained now, a yard that showed signs of neglect, an overall appearance of isolation and decline. When I returned home, Sarah was on the phone in the living room, her voice low and urgent. I caught fragments of her conversation as I passed by. Becoming increasingly agitated and paranoid, refuses to cooperate with basic financial planning, may need to expedite the evaluation. I continued to my workshop, where I retrieved the secret phone and immediately called Janet Morrison. She's accelerating the timeline, I told her. Tried to get me to sign over complete financial control this morning, and when I refused, she started talking about medical evaluations. How much time do you think you have? Maybe a few days, maybe less. She's calling someone right now, probably her attorney or my doctor. Don, you need to get ahead of this. If she manages to get a mental health evaluation that goes her way, you'll lose all your legal standing. Once you're declared incompetent, it's almost impossible to reverse. I felt the walls closing in around me, the careful trap Sarah had been building finally revealing its true dimensions. She'd been planning this for months, maybe years, waiting for the right moment to strike. What are my options? You need your own attorney, someone who specializes in elder law and financial abuse. You need to document everything she's done. The isolation, the mail tampering, the manipulation. And you need to do it before she can get you declared incompetent. Can you recommend someone? David Chen, Mrs. Chen's son. He's an attorney downtown, deals with these cases all the time. I'll call his office and see if he can see you today. Within an hour, Janet had arranged for me to meet with David Chen at his office that afternoon. The challenge would be getting there without Sarah following me or becoming suspicious about my absence. I told her I was going to the hardware store, a routine trip that shouldn't raise any red flags. But as I backed out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of her in the front window, phone pressed to her ear, watching my departure with the intensity of a predator tracking wounded prey. David Chen's office was in a modest building downtown, the kind of place where substance mattered more than appearance. Chen himself was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen enough family dysfunction to remain unshocked by even the worst behavior. Mrs. Morrison filled me in on the basics, he said after I'd settled into the chair across from his desk. But I need to hear the details from you. Start from the beginning. I spent the next hour walking him through everything. Sarah's sudden return home, her gradual takeover of my household, the canceled utilities, the attempted power of attorney grab. Chen took notes without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. How much money are we talking about? He asked finally. About $400,000 in retirement accounts, plus the house, which is worth maybe $350,000. And Helen's life insurance policy, another $100,000. So your daughter stands to inherit roughly $850,000. Put that way, the amount seemed enormous. Certainly enough to motivate someone facing financial ruin to commit elder abuse. I thought about Sarah's expensive tastes, her failed marriage, her mounting debts. How desperate was she really? What are my options? I asked. Several, but they all require immediate action. First, we need to establish your mental competency with an independent evaluation, someone she can't influence or manipulate. Second, we need to document the abuse, the isolation, the financial manipulation, the attempts to control your medical care. Third, we need to take legal action to prevent her from gaining power of attorney or accessing your accounts. How long will all that take? If we move fast, maybe a week, but that assumes she doesn't accelerate her own timeline. If she gets a court order for a mental health evaluation before we can establish your competency with an independent doctor, he didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood the stakes. There's something else, Chen said. If what you're telling me is accurate, your daughter may have already committed several crimes: mail tampering, financial fraud, elder abuse. Are you prepared for the possibility that she could face criminal charges? The question hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything Sarah had done, despite the manipulation and the lies and the systematic destruction of my independence, she was still my daughter. The little girl who'd fallen asleep in my lap while I read her bedtime stories, who'd called me from college every Sunday without fail, who'd held my hand at Helen's funeral when the grief threatened to overwhelm me. I don't want to destroy her life, I said quietly. Mr. Matthews, she's trying to destroy yours. The question is whether you're going to let her succeed. I signed the retainer agreement and left Chen's office with a thick folder of documents to review and a court date scheduled for the following week. The plan was aggressive but necessary. An emergency petition to prevent Sarah from gaining any legal control over my affairs, accompanied by a mental competency evaluation from an independent psychiatrist. The drive home gave me time to think about what I was about to set in motion. Once I filed those papers, there would be no going back. The relationship with my daughter, already strained to the breaking point, would likely be destroyed completely. But what choice did I have? Stand by and let her steal everything Helen and I had worked for? Allow myself to be warehoused in a nursing home while she lived off my life savings? Helen would have fought. She would have fought with everything she had, not just for the money, but for the principle of the thing. She'd raised Sarah to be better than this, to value family over financial gain, to understand that love couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. Somewhere along the way, that lesson had been lost. I arrived home to find Sarah's car gone and a note on the kitchen counter. Gone grocery shopping. Dr. Peterson wants to see you tomorrow at 2 p.m. Very important that you keep this appointment. S. The appointment I hadn't scheduled for a condition I didn't have, with a doctor who'd been compromised by my daughter's manipulation. The net was tightening, exactly as Chen had predicted. I immediately called Dr. Peterson's office on the secret phone. Hi, this is Don Matthews. I understand my daughter scheduled an appointment for me tomorrow? Yes, Mr. Matthews. She called this morning very concerned about your mental state. Said you'd been having episodes of confusion and paranoia, refusing to take care of basic financial responsibilities. She requested a comprehensive evaluation. I'd like to cancel that appointment. Oh, the receptionist sounded surprised. Are you sure? Your daughter seemed very worried about you. I'm sure. If I need medical care, I'll schedule it myself. Of course, Mr. Matthews, I'll cancel the appointment. But I knew that wouldn't be the end of it. Sarah would call back, probably with some story about how my refusal to see the doctor was further evidence of my mental decline. She might even show up at the office with her power of attorney documents, claiming legal authority to make medical decisions on my behalf. I spent the evening in my workshop, organizing my evidence and preparing for the legal battle ahead. The digital recorder had captured hours of Sarah's manipulation, including her attempt to pressure me into signing the financial documents that morning. I also had Janet's photographs and documentation, plus my own detailed notes about the past 3 weeks. It should be enough to establish a pattern of abuse, enough to convince a judge that Sarah's motives were financial rather than medical. But I'd learned not to underestimate my daughter's ability to manipulate situations to her advantage. The real test would come in the morning, when Sarah discovered that I'd canceled the doctor's appointment. How would she react? What would be her next move in this escalating game of control and resistance? I didn't have to wait long to find out. Sarah returned from her grocery shopping trip just after 9 p.m., carrying bags filled with more of the healthy, tasteless food she'd been forcing on me since her arrival. She moved through the kitchen with mechanical efficiency, putting away items and organizing the refrigerator with the obsessive precision that had characterized her entire life. "How was your afternoon?" she asked, without looking at me. "Productive. Went to the hardware store, picked up some things for the workshop." She nodded absently, but I could see the calculation in her movements. Sarah had always been good at multitasking, handling several complex problems simultaneously while appearing calm and collected on the surface. "Don't forget about your appointment tomorrow," she said. "Dr. Peterson is fitting you in as a special favor. I really think this evaluation will help clarify some things." I canceled the appointment. The words hung in the air between us like a detonated grenade. Sarah froze in the middle of putting away a container of Greek yogurt. Her back still turned to me. When she finally faced me, her expression was carefully controlled, but I could see the fury burning just beneath the surface. "You what?" I called Dr. Peterson's office and canceled the appointment. "If I need medical care, I'll schedule it myself." "Dad, that appointment was important. Dr. Peterson specifically—" "Dr. Peterson didn't recommend anything. You called his office and told them I was having mental health issues. You tried to use my own doctor against me." Sarah's mask was slipping again, revealing the calculating predator underneath the concerned daughter facade. "I'm worried about you. Your behavior has been increasingly erratic, and I have a responsibility as your family to make sure you get the care you need. The only thing I need is for you to stop trying to control my life." "Control your life?" Sarah's voice rose slightly, the first crack in her carefully maintained composure. "I moved back home to take care of you. I put my own life on hold to make sure you weren't rattling around this house alone, making God knows what kind of decisions. You moved back home because you're broke and desperate, and you see me as your ticket to financial security." The accusation hit its target. Sarah's face went white, then flushed red with anger and embarrassment. For a moment, she looked exactly like she had as a child when caught in a lie, cornered, defensive, and dangerous. "How dare you?" she whispered. "How dare you accuse me of something so horrible? I'm trying to help you, and you're acting like I'm some kind of criminal. Aren't you? Intercepting my mail, canceling my utilities, trying to trick me into signing over power of attorney? What would you call that? I would call it taking care of a father who's clearly not capable of taking care of himself anymore." The gaslighting was automatic now, reflexive. Sarah had perfected the art of turning every confrontation back on her victim, making them question their own perceptions and judgment. It was a skill that had probably served her well in the corporate world, but it felt particularly vicious when deployed against her own father. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself," I said firmly. "What I'm not capable of is protecting myself from my own daughter's manipulation." "Manipulation?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Dad, listen to yourself. You sound paranoid, delusional. These are exactly the symptoms Dr. Peterson needs to evaluate. The only person who needs evaluating is you." Sarah stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her recalculating once again. When she spoke, her voice was different, colder, more businesslike. The pretense of loving concern had been abandoned. "Fine," she said. "If that's how you want to play this, we'll play it your way. But don't come crying to me when you realize you're in over your head." She left the kitchen without another word, taking the stairs two at a time like she had as a teenager when things didn't go her way. A few minutes later, I heard her door slam, followed by the muffled sound of her voice as she made phone calls. I sat at the kitchen table for a while, thinking about the conversation and what it meant. The gloves were off now. Sarah knew that I was onto her scheme, and she would adjust her strategy accordingly. Whatever came next would be more aggressive, more direct. I checked the secret phone and found 3 text messages from Janet Morrison. Saw Sarah's car leave around 7. "Everything okay?" David Chen called. "Says you're all set for next week. Stay strong. You're doing the right thing." The support meant more than I could express. For weeks, I'd felt completely isolated, cut off from anyone who might offer help or perspective. Now, at least, I had allies, people who understood what was happening and were willing to help me fight back. I spent the rest of the evening in my workshop, reviewing the legal documents Chen had given me and preparing for what was likely to be a difficult confrontation in the morning. Sarah wouldn't give up easily, and she had resources I was only beginning to understand. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by the sound of Sarah's voice drifting through the thin walls as she continued making phone calls late into the night. I caught fragments of conversation, accelerated timeline, emergency evaluation, safety concerns. She was mobilizing her network, calling in favors, preparing for war. Morning brought fresh snow, the first of the season, coating the yard in pristine white that reminded me of better times when winter meant sledding with the kids and hot chocolate by the fireplace. Now it just felt like another layer of isolation, another barrier between me and the outside world. Sarah was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, dressed in a dark business suit and typing rapidly on her laptop. She looked up when I entered, and her expression was all business, no pretense of warmth or familial affection. "I've rescheduled your appointment with Dr. Peterson for this afternoon," she announced. "And I've arranged for Dr. Elizabeth Hawkins, a geriatric psychiatrist, to conduct a comprehensive evaluation tomorrow morning. I told you yesterday I'm not going to any appointments I didn't schedule myself." "Actually, you are." Sarah closed her laptop with a decisive snap. "I've been in contact with the court this morning. Given your recent behavior and your refusal to seek appropriate medical care, I'm filing for emergency guardianship." Emergency guardianship, the nuclear option, the legal mechanism that would strip away all my rights and place them in Sarah's hands. If she succeeded, I would become essentially a ward of the state, with her as my guardian, unable to make any decisions about my life, my health, or my finances. "You can't do that," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew she could. Emergency guardianship proceedings were designed to protect vulnerable elderly people, but they could also be weaponized by unscrupulous family members who knew how to work the system. I can, and I am. I have documentation of your declining mental state, your refusal to maintain basic hygiene and nutrition, your paranoid accusations against family members trying to help you. Any judge will see that you're a danger to yourself. The documentation? Phone calls to Dr. Peterson painting me as confused and paranoid. Carefully orchestrated situations designed to make me appear incompetent. Financial records showing the canceled utilities as evidence of my inability to manage basic responsibilities rather than her deliberate sabotage. Sarah had been building this case for weeks, maybe months, creating a paper trail that would support her narrative of a devoted daughter forced to take control of her declining father's affairs. It was brilliant in its calculation and terrifying in its implications. "The hearing is scheduled for Friday morning," Sarah continued, 3 days from now. "I suggest you use that time to come to terms with reality and stop fighting me on this. It'll be easier for both of us if you cooperate." She stood up from the table and gathered her things, moving with the crisp efficiency of someone executing a well-rehearsed plan. At the door, she paused and looked back at me. "For what it's worth, Dad, I really am trying to help you. I know you can't see that right now, but someday you'll understand that this was all for your own good." Then she was gone, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the weight of her ultimatum pressing down on my shoulders like a physical force. 3 days. I had 3 days to prevent my daughter from legally stealing my life. I immediately called David Chen's office. "Emergency guardianship?" Chen's voice was grim when I explained the situation. "That's aggressive, even for a case like this. She must be more desperate than we thought. Can she win? If she's been building a case for weeks and we only have 3 days to prepare, it's possible. Emergency guardianship hearings are designed to err on the side of caution. If she can convince a judge that you're in immediate danger." What do we need to do? Everything, and we need to do it fast. I'm going to file our own emergency motion this morning, requesting that the court reject her guardianship petition and investigate her for elder abuse. We'll need that independent psychiatric evaluation immediately. I can get Dr. Susan Martinez to see you this afternoon. And we'll need character witnesses, people who can testify to your mental competency. Janet Morrison, maybe Mrs. Chen from next door? Anyone else? What about your son, Michael? I hesitated. Michael and I hadn't spoken in over a month, not since I'd told him about Sarah moving back home. He'd been skeptical of her motives from the beginning, warning me to be careful about my finances and my legal documents. At the time, I'd brushed off his concerns as sibling rivalry. Now I wished I'd listened to him. "I'll call him," I said. "Good. And Mr. Matthews, be very careful over the next 3 days."
If your daughter is willing to file for emergency guardianship, she's desperate enough to do other things. Don't be alone with her if you can avoid it, and document everything she says or does. After hanging up with Chen, I sat in my workshop for a long moment, trying to process what my life had become. 3 days ago, my biggest worry had been loneliness and the slow fade of old age. Now I was facing the complete loss of my autonomy, my dignity, and my life savings, all at the hands of my own daughter. I picked up the secret phone and dialed Michael's number, my hands shaking slightly as I waited for him to answer. "Dad?" His voice was surprised, probably because I never called him during working hours. "Everything okay?" "No, son, it's not. I need your help." I spent the next hour explaining everything to Michael: Sarah's manipulation, the canceled utilities, the attempted power grab, and now the emergency guardianship petition. My son listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just absorbing the magnitude of what his sister had done. "Jesus Christ, Dad," he said finally. "I knew Sarah was desperate, but this is criminal. Can you come home? I know it's a lot to ask with your job and everything, but I could really use your support at the hearing." "Of course I can come home. I'll drive up tonight, take the rest of the week off. And Dad, we're going to fight this thing. Sarah isn't going to destroy what you and Mom built together." The relief I felt at hearing those words was overwhelming. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't facing it alone. Michael would come home, would stand with me against his sister's manipulation, would help me preserve what was left of my independence and dignity. But 3 days was still an impossibly short time to build a legal defense against months of careful planning. Sarah had the advantage of preparation, of documentation, of a narrative that painted her as the concerned daughter and me as the declining father. Overcoming that advantage would require everything we had and a little bit of luck. I spent the afternoon with Dr. Martinez, the psychiatrist Chen had recommended. She was thorough and professional, conducting a comprehensive evaluation of my mental state, my cognitive abilities, and my capacity to make independent decisions. The tests were exhausting but necessary, proof that I was competent to manage my own affairs despite Sarah's claims to the contrary. "Your cognitive function is completely normal for someone your age," Dr. Martinez told me at the end of the session. "There's no evidence of dementia, depression, or any other condition that would impair your judgment. I'll have my report ready for the court by Thursday." One hurdle cleared, but many more remained. When I returned home, I found Michael's truck in the driveway and my son sitting on the front porch waiting for me with a grim expression. "Sarah's inside," he said.
"We need to talk before you go in there." We walked to the workshop where Michael could speak freely without being overheard. My younger son looked like Helen around the eyes, but had inherited my stubborn jaw and my tendency to speak bluntly when the situation called for it. "I did some research on the drive up here," he said. "Sarah's in worse financial shape than we thought. She's facing bankruptcy, Dad. Lost her job 6 months ago, not 2 weeks ago like she told you. Her divorce settlement was a disaster. She owes her ex-husband money, not the other way around. And she's been borrowing against her credit cards to maintain her lifestyle. How much does she owe? Based on what I could find in public records, at least $200,000, maybe more. She's drowning, Dad, and she sees your money as her only way out. $200,000 in debt? No wonder Sarah had been so aggressive in her manipulation, so willing to risk everything on this desperate gamble. She wasn't just trying to secure her inheritance, she was trying to survive financial ruin." "There's something else," Michael continued. "I talked to her ex-husband, Richard. He says Sarah tried to get him to loan her money to help with Dad's care. When he refused, she got angry and accused him of abandoning his family responsibilities. The picture was becoming clearer. Sarah hadn't just targeted me. She'd been working every possible angle, trying to extract money from anyone who might feel obligated to help her. When those efforts failed, she'd focused all her energy on the biggest prize, my retirement savings and the house. We need to go inside," I said. "Face this head on." Michael nodded. "I've got your back, Dad. Whatever she says or does, remember that I'm here and I believe you." Sarah was in the living room when we entered, her laptop open and documents scattered across the coffee table. She looked up when we walked in, and her expression shifted from surprise to calculation to something that might have been fear. "Michael," she said carefully, "I didn't know you were coming." "Emergency guardianship proceedings tend to bring families together," Michael replied, his voice cold. "Funny how you forgot to mention that when you called to tell me Dad was having health issues." "He is having health issues, mental health issues. I've been trying to get him the help he needs, but he's been resistant to treatment." "Cut the shit, Sarah." Michael's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "I know about the debt, about the job you lost months ago, about the divorce settlement. This isn't about Dad's health, it's about your desperation." Sarah's carefully constructed facade finally cracked completely. The mask of concern fell away, revealing something harder and more honest underneath. "Fine," she said. "You want the truth? Here's the truth. I'm broke. I'm facing bankruptcy, and I need help. Dad has more money than he knows what to do with, more than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. Is it so wrong for me to want some security, some guarantee that I won't end up homeless?" "It's wrong when you try to steal it," Michael shot back. "It's wrong when you manipulate and lie and try to have our father declare incompetent. It's wrong when you destroy his independence to serve your own financial interests. I'm not destroying anything. I'm trying to help him manage his affairs before he becomes completely incapable of doing it himself. Look at him. He's isolated, paranoid, barely taking care of himself. In 5 years, maybe less, he'll need full-time care anyway. Why not plan for that now?" The argument continued for another hour, voices rising and falling as decades of family dysfunction spilled out into the open. Sarah accused Michael of abandoning the family, of leaving her to handle all the responsibilities while he pursued his own life. Michael accused Sarah of manipulation and financial abuse, of betraying the trust our parents had placed in her. I listened to my children tear each other apart and felt something break inside my chest. This wasn't what Helen and I had wanted for our family. We'd raised them to love each other, to support each other through life's challenges. Instead, my approaching mortality had turned them into enemies, fighting over assets that hadn't even been distributed yet. "Enough," I said finally, my voice cutting through their argument. "Both of you, enough." The room fell silent. Sarah and Michael turned to look at me, and I could see Helen in both their faces, her determination in Sarah's expression, her compassion in Michael's eyes. "Sarah," I said quietly, "if you needed money, why didn't you just ask me? Why all the manipulation and control and legal maneuvering? Did you really think I wouldn't help my own daughter in a crisis?" For a moment, Sarah's hardened expression softened, and I caught a glimpse of the little girl she'd once been. "Because I knew you'd say no. Because I knew you'd lecture me about responsibility and making better choices. Because I was ashamed. So instead, you decided to steal from me? I decided to take what should have been mine anyway. Mom always said the house would go to me, that I'd be the one to carry on the family legacy. Michael never cared about this place. He couldn't wait to get away from here." The reference to Helen hit me like a physical blow. Sarah was right that Helen had always assumed she'd inherit the house. She was the daughter, the one who'd stayed closer to home, the one who'd shown interest in family history. But Helen had also assumed that Sarah would be a responsible custodian of that legacy, not someone who would manipulate and abuse her own father to claim it early. "Your mother never intended for you to steal my independence along with the inheritance," I said. "I'm not stealing anything. I'm trying to preserve it. In 5 years, Dad, you'll be in a nursing home, spending down your assets until you qualify for Medicaid. Everything you and Mom worked for will go to medical bills and institutional care. This way, at least some of it stays in the family." There was a twisted logic to her argument, the kind of rationalization that allowed people to justify terrible behavior by focusing on practical outcomes rather than moral principles. Sarah had convinced herself that she was saving the family fortune, that her theft was actually a form of preservation. "The hearing is Friday morning," Sarah continued, gathering her documents. "I'll be staying at a hotel until then. I think it's better if we have some space to process all this. But Dad, I want you to know that I still love you, and I still believe this is the right thing to do." She left without another word, taking her laptop and her carefully constructed legal case with her. Michael and I sat in the suddenly quiet living room, processing what had just happened. "She really believes she's helping," Michael said finally. "That's what makes her so dangerous," I replied. "People who think they're acting from noble motives are capable of almost anything." The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Michael took charge of organizing our defense, working with David Chen to gather evidence and prepare witnesses. Janet Morrison agreed to testify about Sarah's isolating behavior, and Dr. Martinez provided her psychiatric evaluation confirming my mental competency. We also discovered more evidence of Sarah's financial desperation. Bank records showed that she'd been paying only minimum balances on her credit cards for months, and her checking account was overdrawn by nearly $3,000. The pressure she'd been under was immense, enough to drive someone to desperate measures. Thursday evening, the night before the hearing, Michael and I sat in the kitchen sharing a bottle of the good whiskey I'd been saving for a special occasion. It seemed appropriate somehow. Either we'd be celebrating victory tomorrow or mourning the end of my independence. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Michael said, "I want you to know that I'm proud of you for fighting this. A lot of people in your situation would have just given up, signed the papers, let her take control. Your mother wouldn't have given up," I said. "She'd have fought tooth and nail to protect what we built together. Mom would have seen through Sarah's manipulation from the beginning. She always could read people better than the rest of us." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, 2 men facing an uncertain future with whatever courage we could muster. Tomorrow would determine whether I retained control of my own life or become a ward of the court, dependent on Sarah's questionable mercy for my basic needs and dignity. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, I wasn't alone. My son was here, my friends were supporting me, and I had competent legal representation. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to give me hope. The hearing would begin at 9 a.m. sharp, and my future hung in the balance. Friday morning dawned clear and cold, with the kind of bright autumn sunlight that made everything look sharp and clean. I dressed carefully, in my best suit, the navy blue one I'd worn to Helen's funeral and every important occasion since. Michael wore a similar suit, and together we looked like what we were, two men prepared to fight for something important. The courthouse was smaller than I'd expected, more like a municipal building than the grand temple of justice I'd imagined. David Chen met us in the lobby, carrying a briefcase full of evidence and wearing the confident expression of someone who believed in his case. "How are you feeling?" he asked as we walked toward the courtroom. "Ready," I said, and meant it. The hearing room was compact and functional, with fluorescent lighting that made everything look slightly unreal. Sarah was already there, with her attorney, a sharp-dressed woman in her 50s who looked like she specialized in family law. Sarah herself appeared composed and professional, every inch the concerned daughter forced to take difficult action for her father's own good. Judge Patricia Hendricks was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She'd been hearing cases like this for decades, and Chen had warned me that she was both fair and thorough, exactly the kind of judge we wanted for a case like this. "This is an emergency guardianship petition filed by Sarah Matthews concerning her father, Donald Matthews," Judge Hendricks began. "Ms. Matthews claims that her father is no longer competent to manage his own affairs and requires court-appointed guardianship for his own protection." Sarah's attorney presented her case first, painting a picture of a declining elderly man who'd become increasingly isolated and paranoid since his wife's death. She had Dr. Peterson's about my mental health concerns, evidence of the canceled utilities as proof of my inability to manage basic responsibilities, and testimony about my aggressive and irrational behavior toward family members trying to help. It was a compelling narrative, backed by official-looking documents and delivered with professional confidence. If I hadn't known the truth behind each piece of evidence, I might have been convinced myself. Then it was our turn. Chen began by calling Dr. Martinez to testify about my psychiatric evaluation. Her testimony was clear and unambiguous. I showed no signs of cognitive decline, dementia, or any other condition that would impair my judgment or decision-making capacity. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Martinez concluded, "Mr. Matthews is fully competent to manage his own affairs and make independent decisions about his life and health care." Next came Janet Morrison, who testified about Sarah's systematic isolation of me and her suspicious behavior around the mail and utilities. Janet's matter-of-fact delivery and obvious sincerity made her a powerful witness. Michael testified about Sarah's financial desperation and her attempts to manipulate family members for money. He presented bank records and employment documents that painted a picture of someone facing financial ruin, desperate enough to exploit her own father for survival. Finally, I took the stand myself. "Mr. Matthews," Chen said, "do you believe you're competent to manage your own affairs?" "Yes, I do." "Why do you think your daughter filed this petition?" I looked across the courtroom at Sarah, seeing the little girl I'd taught to ride a bicycle alongside the desperate woman who was trying to steal my independence. "Because she's afraid and broke, and she thinks my money is her only way out of the hole she's dug for herself." "Do you love your daughter?" "Yes, I do. But love doesn't mean allowing someone to destroy your life, even if they're family." Sarah's attorney cross-examined me aggressively, trying to paint my resistance to her client's help as evidence of paranoia and poor judgment. But Chen had prepared me well, and I answered each question calmly and directly, never losing my temper or appearing confused. The hearing lasted 3 hours. When both sides had presented their evidence, Judge Hendricks retired to her chambers to consider the testimony. Michael and I waited in the hallway, drinking bitter coffee from a vending machine and trying not to think of what would happen. 45 minutes later, we were called back into the courtroom. After careful consideration of all the evidence presented, Judge Hendricks began, "I find that Donald Matthews is mentally competent and capable of managing his own affairs. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied." The relief was overwhelming, like a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. I'd won. I'd kept my independence, my dignity, and control over my own life. But the judge wasn't finished. "However," she continued, "this case has raised serious concerns about potential elder abuse and financial exploitation. I'm ordering a full investigation by Adult Protective Services into the allegations against Sarah Matthews. Additionally, I'm issuing a protective order prohibiting Miss Matthews from accessing her father's financial accounts or interfering with his medical care without his explicit consent." Sarah's face went white. The legal victory was mine, but the cost to our family was devastating. My daughter was now under investigation for elder abuse, facing potential criminal charges for her attempts to control my life. As we left the courtroom, Sarah approached me one last time. "Dad," she said quietly, "I know you think I'm a monster, but I really was trying to help. I was scared of going bankrupt, scared of losing everything, scared of being alone. I made terrible choices, but they came from fear, not malice." "I know," I said, "but fear doesn't excuse what you did. And I can't trust you anymore, Sarah. Maybe someday, but not now." She nodded and walked away, her attorney beside her, facing an uncertain future filled with legal consequences and family estrangement. I watched her go and felt something break in my chest, not the sharp pain of betrayal, but the dull ache of loss. Michael drove me home in silence, both of us processing what we'd been through and what it meant for our family's future. The house felt different when we walked inside, lighter somehow, no longer a prison, but a home again. "What happens now?" Michael asked. "Now I figure out how to live the rest of my life," I said, "and you go back to your own life, knowing that your old man isn't as helpless as he sometimes appears." "I never thought you were helpless, Dad. Stubborn, maybe, independent to a fault, but never helpless." That evening, after Michael had driven back to his own life and his own responsibilities, I sat in my workshop with the secret phone and called Janet Morrison to thank her for her support. Then I called David Chen to discuss the ongoing investigation and what it might mean for Sarah's future. Finally, I called Sarah's number. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice small and defeated. "Dad?" "I wanted you to know that I still love you," I said. "What you did was wrong, and I can't forgive it right away, but you're still my daughter. When you're ready to rebuild our relationship on honest terms, I'll be here." She was crying when she hung up, and I sat in the quiet workshop thinking about families and trust and the price of desperation. Sarah would face the consequences of her choices, but she wouldn't face them completely alone. Love didn't excuse her behavior, but it didn't disappear either. The secret phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Proud of you, Dad. Mom would be proud too." I thought about Helen, about the woman who'd shared my life and helped me raise two complicated children who'd grown into complicated adults. She'd always believed that family could overcome anything if they were willing to work at it, to forgive each other's failures and celebrate each other's victories. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was still hope for us, even after everything that had happened. But that hope would have to be built on honesty and respect, not manipulation and control. I put away the secret phone and turned off the lights in the workshop. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to either build bridges or burn them down. But tonight, I was free. Free to make my own choices, manage my own affairs, and live my own life on my own terms. It had taken a war with my own daughter to secure that freedom, but it was mine now, and I intended to make the most of whatever time I had left. The grandfather clock in the living room chimed midnight as I headed upstairs to bed, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another.
Outside, snow was falling again, covering the world in pristine white, hiding all the scars and imperfections under a blanket of fresh possibility.